While the rest of Canada is celebrating Queen Victoria, Quebec is having a very different celebration. The Monday preceding the 25th of May is National Patriots Day, commemorating the Rebellion of 1837. This was an armed insurrection that occurred in Lower Canada and inspired another in Upper Canada. Typically, failed rebellions are not treated as statutory holidays, so let's look at the history behind this day. To begin, we must rewind to when New France was conquered by Britain. With the British now owning a large swath of land with mostly French Catholics, they passed the Quebec Act. This reinstituted French civil law in the region, officially recognized the French language, Catholicism, and allowed colonials of French origin to participate in civil administration of the colony. Now, this rustled some southern jimmies, and for this and many other reasons, 13 British colonies to the south rebelled and became independent. This caused an influx of loyalist refugees to come pouring into what was the western part of Quebec. Suddenly, in a colony dominated by the French and the laws structured around them, there was a ton of Brits who wanted their old system. To solve these grievances, the Constitutional Act of 1791 was created. This act divided Quebec into Upper Canada with an English-speaking majority and Lower Canada with a French-speaking majority. Each colony now had a House of Assembly, which worked with the Legislative Council to pass laws for the peace, good order, and healthy administration of the colonies. However, their powers were below those of the offices of the governor. The next year would introduce an Executive Council, whose members were appointed by the king. These new members were also only accountable to the governor, who was accountable to the imperial government, meaning the Executive Council and the governor were more powerful than the elected members of the government, and, in practice, did not work in the interest of the people. This disconnect would create problems, culminating in an armed uprising. In the first election of Lower Canada, with 50 seats at stake, French speakers won 34 of the seats and the English had the rest. Immediately, the language debate began. See, French did not have an official status in Lower Canada. Since the Constitution of 1791 did not completely amend the Quebec Act, one might assume that French would be the official language. However, the Quebec Act only acknowledged that people spoke French and allowed it, not enshrining its place in government. Up until this point, all government documents were published in both languages, and after a heated debate, the Assembly passed a law decreeing both languages official. Despite the will of the people, back in London they decided to overrule this decision and impose English as the only official language. While passing laws covering the judiciary, highways, and militia, the Assembly became divided into two parties, the Tories and the Canadian Party, split between French and English. The two parties fought bitterly, and most of the bills passed by the majority Canadian Party were shot down by the Legislative Council. After winning the 1808 election, the Canadian Party voted to expel 2 English members, which enraged the governor, causing him to call a re-election. Despite dismantling the French-speaking papers, the Canadian Party won again. While Lower Canada and Upper Canada, to a lesser extent, dealt with internal struggles, the Americans were planning an invasion. Declaring war on the British, the War of 1812 began. Although during this period French and English people of the Canadas worked together, unity was short-lived after peace in 1814. The Tories continued to push for an English-style government, meaning the political power would be held by the aristocracy, intense focus on trade, unconditional loyalty to the crown, and a culture foreign from Protestantism. Meanwhile, the Canadian Party pushed for a very different message. They wished for the middle and lower classes to hold the power, favoring domestic trade, the agricultural sector, and Catholicism. The parties were left in a stalemate, tensions ever rising. Along with the ever-present imperial thumb and cultural divides, there was an outbreak of cholera from immigrants from the British Isles and an agricultural crisis. In 1834, the Canadian Party sent London their 92 resolutions and an emissary bearing a petition with 87,000 signatures. The resolution mainly focused on stripping the power away from the unelected houses and putting more influence with the Assembly, implementing a responsible government. The resolutions were ignored for 3 years. The Canadian Party had tried all diplomatic channels to stir change in their suffering constituencies, but were constantly blocked by the English aristocracy. In 1837, the Assembly refused to approve supplies to the Council, causing civil servants to go unpaid, public works to come to a halt, and paralyze the government. Following this, London finally denied the 92 resolutions and introduced the 10 Russell resolutions. These rejected most of the demands and gave power to the governor to take money directly from the colony's treasury. The Patriots' response was to boycott British goods and hold mass protests across the colony. As they did so, they also prepared for an armed uprising. It is important to note here that the colony was not wholly divided into two parts. There were factions in both parties and many other subgroups, etc. While some patriots prepared for the uprising, many more moderates only agreed to go along in hopes that the British would concede at the threat of an uprising. While the patriots amassed arms, so did the British. They began bringing troops from all over the empire to be stationed in Lower Canada, and began turning a blind eye to militant Anglophone groups. On the 6th of November, 1837, a group of militant patriots clashed with their English counterpart in Montreal. While shots were fired, Francophones practiced civil disobedience, causing British authority to dissipate across the countryside. An arrest warrant was issued for the leaders of the Patriots, and the British came hunting for them. The Patriots won the first major engagement of the rebellion on the 16th, but were crushed just 2 days later. On the 30th, the British returned to the site of the first battle. Despite the town surrendering without a fight, the British sacked the town, setting ablaze 50 homes. After the capture of St. Eustache on the 14th of December, the rebellion collapsed and widespread looting and burning of French settlements occurred throughout Lower Canada. With hundreds dead and many more captured, the leaders, including Louis-Joseph Papineau, leader and speaker of the Patriots since 1815, fled to the United States. With Papineau in the States, Lord Durham was brought by London to restore order and find a solution. He issued amnesty to most of the prisoners, but his measures were poorly supported back home, so he resigned. Upon Lord Durham's departure, the insurgents returned from the States, only to be put down within the week. For both uprisings, 13 men were executed, one by rebels, 58 were sent to Australia, and 325 were killed in 6 battles, including 27 soldiers. The rebels were ill-equipped, scattered, poorly led, and without sufficient foreign backing. The rebellion was doomed to fail. A direct consequence would be the Act of Union, uniting the Canadas. This new parliament held 84 elected representatives, half for one Canada and the rest for the other. The strategy by the British was to create a fake majority, since Lower Canada had a higher population, and wait for immigration to take its toll and turn the French into an official minority. With Papineau in exile in Paris, the champion of the French Canadians became Sir Louis Hippolyte Lafontaine. He believed that political parties should be viewed by their opinions, not origins, and advocated that social peace would come when racial distinctions were removed from the public administration, and institutions were provided more freedoms. Ultimately, the Patriots were fighting for a responsible government and proper democracy. Their underlying concerns with the English controlling the poorer French would not be focused on until the Quiet Revolution. On a day the rest of Canada celebrates a monarch who never set foot in their country, Quebecers remember the local men who lost their lives fighting for the fundamental principles of democracy.